Hello, everybody, and welcome to There's a Will. One of my guests said something funny. Just as the jingle was ending, he said, if there were an Everest of chat, this is not it. And I firmly agree. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you to this edition of There's a Will. We're going to be talking about freedom, a word which can be taken a lot of ways, and we hope we take it in at least a couple of the good ways. And hold your attention for the next 3/4 of an hour, something like that. My guests in the studio are cousin Nicky Richardson, resplendent as usual, tailored by Savile Row.
Thank you.
And all I can say, best dressed man in town. And no relation, by the way, unfortunately. He won't even tell me his tailor's address. And with me in the studio, the inimitable master of all things, European, Guy Pinsent, of the Foreign Office, that would be the UK Foreign Office, and now a kingpin of the storage business in Central Europe. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for
Once
having
again,
us.
I think people probably know you by now. I like to do these long introductions, because it amuses me. Even if
It amuses me as well.
Does it amuse you? Okay, good. You do look good.
Thank you.
I have to say, I would, what's that? I'd like to meet his tailor.
Well, unfortunately, my
Warren
tailor
Zevon?
retired many years ago. So.
Yeah.
But
He retired?
He
Yeah.
retired a long time ago. But I had enough stuff made, hopefully, which will last me for a few years yet.
Well, every time I see you, you're wearing a new, excellent combo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I realise as an American man, you don't understand colour. That's part of your problem.
No, I lived in London 10 years.
I know you
think
lived in London,
understand.
but it doesn't matter. It didn't
University
really
of
help.
Santa, there's London School of Economics. I think I know.
You think I know? You know colour.
Yeah. I know. I've been to what's it called?
Hilligen Key.
Oh, that's it. I walked by one time.
You walked by. You walked
They
along
wouldn't let me in.
You walked
They said,
along
"You're an
German Street."
American. Go away.
No, they like
Come back when you
they
and
like
show us your green."
They like Americans, I'm sure.
They love us.
They're like anybody who spends money in their emporium.
I went to Hong Kong one time, spent my whole holiday in a shirtier. I don't even know what it means. Yeah. They said, you must go to a shirtier. I was like, what? What about a shirtist?
Yeah.
A shirtist?
A shirtist.
The shirtist. No, the shirtiest. The shirtier.
The shirtiest shirt maker you can
I
find.
shirt. You were shirtier than I.
Yes, clearly.
Guy's the shirtiest person I know. Oh dear, it's not going well, is it?
No.
You should get back to freedom.
Yes.
Well, at least we're sober.
Yes.
Because we were talking before we came on camera about some Oliver Reed appearances, the great Oliver Reed. If people don't know who that is, Oliver Reed was... who was Oliver Reed? Why don't you tell?
He was a fantastic actor. He was well known for being the hard, scary man.
He was a hard scary.
First time I saw him was in the musical of Oliver Twist,
Right.
where he plays the
Terrifying.
big bully Bill Sykes.
Terrifying. It's one of the most scariest screen roles. That and that weirdo in Willy Wonka.
Actually, I
And the
find
Chocolate Factory. Remember the child catcher?
Yeah, the child catch on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that's
Even
right.
today,
Yeah.
when I think about it, it's still scary. Yes.
Still scary. So those two, Bill
Those two.
Sykes. Well, you see, it makes an impression, doesn't it?
It does.
Same impression on me, both of those people, yeah, as a kid. Terrifying, yeah. Anyway, watching some stuff of Oliver Reed on the YouTube. What a guy he could pack away a drink or two, couldn't he?
But that generation of actors all did. They
Yeah.
drank a lot.
The drinking stories they had. didn't they?
That's what they did. They're either acting or they're in the pub.
Yeah, Peter O'Toole and
Richard Harris.
Richard Harris.
Who else? Alan Bates.
Alan Bates. All three of whom I saw on the streets of London at one point or another, since you mentioned it. you know.
Richard Burton, he was of that generation too, wasn't he?
A little bit before them, perhaps. Just a tiny bit, yeah. But yes, yeah.
And that chap, Robert Stevens,
amazing.
another one.
Robert Stevens, he was a pirate, wasn't he? Robert Stevens, wasn't he the guy, wasn't he in Treasure Island?
But he was in a few, but that particular generation of
He was a
actors,
big
they
drinker.
were all very good. I mean,
Yeah.
we're very lucky to
Yeah.
have produced such a group of really good actors.
And Spike Mulligan, the great golfer.
Spike Milligan.
What? Milligan? I thought it was Mulligan, because he was golfing.
Okay.
No, Milligan, I think.
No, he was a goon. Yeah, in the Goon Show. You can still watch that too. At any rate, we're going to talk about freedom because this is a special weekend. I have just returned from the coast, okay? And I'm here to tell you it's still there.
Good.
Still there. In Gdansk, which is where we were filming for Poland Daily Travel, in slightly different attire, wearing my usual baseball cap, so that people don't mob me in the street.
They normally do.
Yeah, just
No, they don't.
Just if I don't
Get
bathe
out of the way.
for a while.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, bathe for a while. Yeah, throw soap at me.
Do you have stalkers? I mean, people who see you on television, they stalk you.
No, people don't pay attention to that.
No.
They might, if they did notice you, they might look at you, something, but they don't.
But they look at you anyway.
Yeah, they do anyway. Good Lord, that's man's
What's Brian Adams doing?
very
here?
odd. What's Brian Adams doing here?
Yeah. What is
Better than Brian Allen. Oh, that's going to go around
Yes,
now.
no, that's-
Just kidding, Brian.
You're doomed now.
Just kidding, Brian. They're equally bad, both of them.
So how did your trip to Gdansk
I'm joking. Yeah.
relate to
Well,
freedom?
careful, because
I'm
jokes
equal with
are
that.
not allowed in certain places these
Drinks
days.
are, what?
Jokes are not allowed sometimes now.
I know. Jokes are not allowed. And that brings us to freedom of speech. This is Independence Day weekend. We're going to date this program. It'll be timeless in our musings, no doubt. But, I wish that I could say to people, my grandfather was Herbert Beerbohm Tree. And then burp, and people go, well, it's just Oliver screwing around. Because Oliver Reed's grandfather was Herbert Beerbohm Tree, the great actor. Carol Reed was his uncle, the great director, etc. Yeah, it must be nice, just to go into pubs and start to spin a yarn or two, and that's it. But it's Independence Weekend, and and it's a time to think about the history of independence, and especially in Poland, it always comes to mind. This is a serious topic. Because without the freedom that was granted to Poland on the 11th of November in 1918, immediately the cessation of World War I, there'd be no Poland.
No.
We wouldn't be here, and this, talking about these very issues. So, it is a huge day for Poland.
And across the world, actually. Today is the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Also today, isn't that amazing? The 11th, Armistice Day, is also that anniversary. Yeah.
But huge, obvious.
I mean, it's amazing to think, isn't it? The Berlin Wall has been down longer than it was up. And
Is
yet it
that
was
right?
such a
Yeah, 30 years.
such a defining part of when we were growing up. The
Well,
Berlin
that's
Wall.
a good point. It's
been down for 30
longer.
years, and it was up, what, for 27, something like that?
Is that right? Yeah. When did it go up? 60?
62, 3 they started.
Yeah. Is it? And they had the Berlin airlift and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So it wasn't it wasn't there right after World War II.
No.
That's the point.
It took some. It took
I hadn't
some
even
years.
thought of that. That's a great point. Yeah.
And
Do
yet,
you remember where you were when it happened?
in London, I think.
Yeah. Were you?
I was in Latin class at school.
You were in Latin class at school, and were you? Did you think? Good Lord, this is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
What was
it
amazing
a
was
huge thing,
the
yeah.
months before that. I don't know if you remember, all these East German tourists got into their Trabants, and they drove to Hungary, and then they got to the Hungarian-Austrian border. They were allowed into Austria, and nobody stopped them. Now that was an amazing moment to watch that on the television. All these East Germans were suddenly allowed out of the block into Austria. And
I
you
didn't remember that. That's amazing.
But that was for me when you think something really remarkable was happening.
Yeah.
Well, why are they being allowed out? This doesn't make any sense. I mean,
Yeah.
it obviously makes sense to us, but it didn't make sense within the context of the then prevailing political system. And that was, that's why I think you began to feel something was changing. Remarkable when you think, really, how you kept a whole half a continent in sort of virtual, well, not slavery is probably an exaggeration, but certainly restricting their freedom considerably. And then we now take for granted the ability to travel where we want to, when we want to, by whatever means we like. I mean, extraordinary.
Well, that's the great thing about the European Union is this freedom of travel. It has its drawbacks in certain ways, but especially when there's an invasion of of people who are not European, as there was in the last couple of years. I mean, it's worth mentioning. But for citizens of the existing citizens, it's an amazing accomplishment, isn't it? The freedom to travel across borders.
It is.
Yeah. Although, being British and being American, we have to jump through. I have to jump through hoops. I've had to. You'll have to jump through some hoops soon too, won't you?
Potentially.
Yeah. If it goes through.
It depends which hoops, but I mean, for us here in Poland, it'll be jumping from Poland elsewhere will be easy. But if you want to go from Poland to other places, it might become more problematic.
Yeah, sure.
Essentially.
Yeah.
But we don't know. The world's a funny place. And
what do you think, Guy, are the main and then Nick, you too, but the main changes that you've seen in this part of the world over this time that freedom has brought? Because as much as people complain about politics, the country is no doubt hugely freer than it once was.
Unquestionably. I mean, Poland today is nearly per capita income since the fall of the Berlin Wall is nearly 150% higher, 2.5 times for every man, woman and child across Poland.
It's like a miracle.
It's an economic miracle.
Yeah.
And Poland's still growing strongly. You can put the beginnings back to the Balcerowicz reforms, so shock therapy, which jump-started the economy. Poland has maintained a relatively favourable low-tax regime. Corporate income tax at 19% until recently has been very, very competitive. So far, there hasn't been a move to increase that. And they have adopted that classical liberal approach to life. And that's one of the reasons why I think we choose to live here. It's a pleasant place to live.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Nick, do you have anything to add? What about the way the country looks?
Well,
that's also striking.
The physical landscape, particularly in the larger cities, is completely different. I remember when I first came to Warsaw at the end of the 90s, you still had a lot of fairly vacant building plots in the centre of town, and now they're full of skyscrapers. And then simple things in daily life, like when I first arrived, there was one cash machine, which was outside the American Express office.
Wow.
And that's the only place. Otherwise, you had to go to a bank which was to get money on a card, which was quite fun. It took about half an hour. And
back in the old days when you could actually get money from American Express.
Yeah, exactly. Indeed. Whereas now, of course, you have cash machines on every street corner. Yeah. And the street corners look very different because you have these modern buildings. So you look in the centre of town and all the immense amount of building that's going on. Yeah. So the physical landscape is very different. The shops are like shops you get anywhere. And the vehicles on the roads, the cars are modern and so on. So it looks like a modern, certainly Warsaw and the other big cities look like a modern European city. Maybe with all the skyscrapers, a slight American sort of flavour.
There is an American flavour, I agree. It looks kind of like Atlanta or Charlotte or something like that.
And of course, talking of freedom and talking of America, then we can also note that on the 11th of November, Poland also joins the United States visa waiver programme. So
talk about freedom, finally.
Yeah, so that's
some
another
people
great
are very
achievement.
annoyed about it. I posted that.
Who would be annoyed
Nicholas,
about
I'm
a visa?
glad you brought that up.
Why would you? Who could be annoyed about a visa?
Well, there's just somebody said, it's a case of too little, too late. But I remember it's not too little, too late. It's a great thing because that means now that Polish people can contribute to America in the way that the Mexicans have.
I'm not sure what the point is there.
just a bad joke.
A very bad joke, yes.
I mean, even more than the Mexicans have.
Well, it's not too little, too late. I mean, I think we will see, if we haven't seen already, of course, the politicians, notably your president and the president of Poland, will now try.
Who's that?
Your president, or the president of your country.
No, you mean the big guy?
Yeah, will no doubt try
fella?
to claim that this is some sort of personal achievement. When, of course, the fact is it's an automatic process. That once the rejected visa rate falls beneath 3%, any country joins the US.
And did it?
Yes, and any country joins the US visa
and
waiver program.
You've checked that, and it did fall below the 3%.
Yes, Poland has reached it on its own merit, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot more people in Poland than in the Czech Republic. I know if you it's easier for
it's easier for
to be rejected.
Yes, exactly.
Small countries get in easier.
And the small countries.
I always thought this was a silly thing. I mean, you should when you look at. This should be done on who you have close allies with.
Well,
the State Department is run by a lot of nincompoops.
Exactly.
As we saw.
And I think also the part of the tension
years.
was caused by the fact that Americans such as yourself,
What?
didn't have to obtain a visa to come to Poland. So I think a lot of Polish folk felt this was a sort of very
I agree with
one-sided relationship.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've always agreed with that. When you look back at the American Revolution, and I had a relative who fought in the Revolution with Pulaski in Savannah. That's where Pulaski was killed. And as you know, the thing to me was this is an old ally. You know, the French also were an old ally. The British too, but there was a little misunderstanding for a while there. And these three countries should have been, you know, always top of the list. So I never understood that, except it just shows the general ignorance of people in bureaucracies.
Sure.
And another reason not to trust them.
And I think freedom is something which needs to be constantly fought for. We're seeing this, I feel,
absolutely
intensely in the last few years.
Yeah. How do you think you're seeing it, and how do you think? What do you think are the main examples?
So, well, lots.
Of how people
First
fighting
of
for
all,
freedom.
I mean, I saw a quote last year from your former great president Ronald Reagan, which was, "Freedom isn't inherently in our genes, passed down from generation to generation. It has to be fought for by every generation and maintained." And I really feel this now.
I think this is Patrick Henry or somebody from the Revolutionary times, or maybe Thomas Paine.
You know, Poland got its freedom again, as
Yeah.
we said, in 1918, 101 years ago now, anniversary. 20 years of turbulent freedom, let's say, and then obviously was divided and wiped off the map again during World War II. Then back on the map, but its borders shifted west, lost huge tracts, including the city of Lvov on the east, but had gains like Breslau, now Wrocław on the west.
Poznan.
But under the communist boot for 45 years. Now Poland has its freedom again, but there are forces in Poland and across the West where it's more of a subtle creeping infringement on freedom. So let me give you an example. And essentially what you've got, you know, we elect our politicians in our free democratic countries who make our laws. But what's happened over the last 20, 25 years is all these quangos who have power without the accountability. So, for example, in Britain you have, and in Canada and America, and plenty of commentators complain about this as well, you have payment employee tribunals hearing cases of employees who are aggrieved. You have all sorts of government regulatory bodies who have a very general direction by the law, but then make it up as they go. To give you a silly example, a health and safety executive in Britain. Huge power over all sorts of regulation in buildings, workplace, schools, you name it. Huge power. And I remember when I first came here as a diplomat, so back in 2003, 2004, my mother was visiting and she says, oh, there's a great story in the paper, you'll like this one. The health and safety executive in Britain have decided to ban conker fights. Because conkers, you know what a conker fight is, yeah?
Oh yeah, there's things that fall off the tree.
The
Yeah,
chestnuts.
the horse
yeah.
chestnuts.
Yeah, horse chestnuts.
Beautiful.
I had to have one with me. No.
Yeah, so, you know, and at school
on,
we
Michael.
grow up. This is a great seasonal thing. You drill a hole in your conker and put it on a string, and then you try and smash.
Everybody
You know,
else's
and if you
conker.
won and yours survived intact, it became a oneer, and then a twoer and a threer. You know, and then if you smashed a conker which had a score of 12, then you got all their points to your conker. So this is just a great kids' game.
Okay.
But an infinitesimally small chance, apparently, according to the health and safety executive, that a chipped conker could fly off and go in someone's eye
Really?
and cause a big problem.
That could
And so there's this idea
So nobody
that...
must risk anything.
Yeah, indeed.
Any
And
risk is a
one
bad
headmaster of a school was being a rebel, and he was issuing goggles to all his pupils so that they could still enjoy conker fights.
Yeah, but what if it pierces your...
These events of this Grenfell Tower in West London, which burnt down, and some people were killed in the fire. And of course, it's now being used politically. It's all the fault of the terrible Tories or whatever. But the point was, this journalist had gone into the building regulations, which run to thousands and thousands of pages, telling you how high your socket has to be above the floor, and hundreds of pages on disabled access. And yet the building regulations have no nothing about the fire safety of external cladding on buildings. Bizarrely, which of course caused the problem in that. So we fall between two stools.
So we're over-regulated.
We're over-regulated.
These are good examples.
We're over-regulated, but at the same time, the regulations miss the obvious things.
They miss some of the obvious things, but why are... because obviously over-regulation is a limit of freedom. It comes back, I'm going to say a cliche right now, sorry. That's cliche alert. I know it's a cliche, folks. Don't throw conkers at me.
They're not allowed to throw conkers at you.
Throw them. I have glasses on, and they are shatterproof.
Oh, good.
But so get your conkers out. Do your best.
Careful.
Conquer me. Conquer me. No.
In your dreams.
You know, they say where my freedom ends, yours begins. That's the old saying, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And this goes back to the Enlightenment.
Right, this is the Enlightenment.
And there became an understood mainstream philosophy, classical liberal philosophy, which is bottom-up conservatism, that freedom starts with the individual, and no one should encroach on that freedom until that encroaches on other people's freedoms. And of course, that immediately goes into very difficult grey areas. You know, you study economics and social studies and all the rest of it. But, you know, the simple example is smoking. Someone who likes to smoke, it's their right to smoke versus someone next to them's right to breathe clean air.
Right. How do you resolve that?
And how do you resolve that? And that's actually, it's a relatively simple one.
Very good example.
You know, I remember as a kid, first time I flew, I was, 12 years old, late 80s.
Yes.
And there was smoking in planes. And
there was, yes.
And the way they...
Yeah, I was just
and the
talking about that
compromise
recently,
was, you could smoke in planes, but so you
yesterday.
declare at check-in whether you're a smoker. Obviously, I wasn't a smoker at age 12, but my parents were.
Yeah.
And, you know, you declare at check-in, are you smoking or non-smoking? Smoking, please. So they'd fill up the back of the plane with smokers and non-smokers from the front of the plane. And that was the compromise. But poor you, if you were a non-smoker, on the exact line between you and smokers. And it's pretty horrible sitting in a plane breathing smoke.
It is.
If you don't
I mean,
smoke.
it's a terrible idea, isn't it? Especially with the way the
Sure.
air circulates.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, so there is this fight the whole time. And obviously one of the most controversial ones is about abortion. You know, the rights of the mother versus the unborn child and so on. So that, I think, is where politicians have a responsibility
What's the difference
to
between
debate these things.
The mother and the unborn, if I may, the difference between the mother and the unborn child is that the mother can vote, the child is under 18.
I mean, it's rather interesting.
They have no rights in that sense.
On the one hand, we sort of give as a society, not necessarily as individuals, we're very squeamish about things like capital punishment, where you take somebody who has, in the extreme case, who's committed a crime which we say is so serious that if found guilty with due process, then the correct penalty is death. And we get very squeamish about that, you can't kill prisoners. And yet at the other end of the spectrum, at the beginning of life, we seem to, or many people seem to think, oh, well, abortion is just one of those things, so we shouldn't get excited about it. And it seems that we've got our view of life, we've got it the wrong way around. We should be, you know, less squeamish about capital punishment, in my view, but we should be a lot more interested. And as a parent, of course, and Guy would agree, I mean, if you're a parent, I think you have a different view of these things, but we should say, yes, you know, maybe we should be paying a bit more attention to things like abortion. And is this really the way we want our society to be, whereby, in some quarters at least, the abortion is seen one of these freedoms, which is fine for those who want it. But of course, you know, what you're saying is we value the perpetuation of our species so lowly that we just think abortion is just a sort of somebody's choice, like they might choose the wallpaper or something. So I make it very simple. People would say it's obviously much more serious than that. But, you know, we seem to have got our view of life and freedom of life and who we protect the wrong way around.
And can I just give some other examples?
Sure, why not? No.
There's an election campaign in Britain just kicked off. So we're sort of 4.5 weeks to go before the 12th of December for voting day.
Right.
And just driving in this morning, I heard a little radio summary.
I will be in England on voting day.
Yeah, I think I will be as well.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And, you know, there was a summary of what's happened so far from both sides of the two main parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And again, there's one of these issues coming up repeatedly now, almost every day in the press, is some offended minority saying, You can't say that because I'm offended by that. Whether the person's making a joke or trying to make a political point or whatever. So a couple of years ago, Boris Johnson was asked about the burqa, very controversial subject, and a huge brouhaha blew up because he said, yes, well, women wearing burqas look like letterboxes. And it was patently a joke.
What's wrong with that?
You tell me, what is wrong with that?
Nothing. It's a joke.
But that was raised again today, this morning, on the radio, as an example of how Boris Johnson is
Oh, no, you're not allowed to make jokes anymore.
You see, the funny thing is, I brought that, just to bring this to practically on a Facebook group of which I was a member. People were talking about this, and there used to be in the same a woman who was a peace deputy, who was, you know, some people on this particular Facebook group were making fun of her for her physical attributes, and I wrote, funny enough, this is very odd. You are the same people who a few days ago were criticising Boris Johnson for making a joke about Muslim women, but it was a joke about Muslim women in general, not particular women. And behind the burqa, you couldn't identify them anyway. And you think it's acceptable now to make jokes about a particular named woman because of her. And one person said, yes, you're right, but the others thought, no, her political views, which were opposed to theirs, meant she was fair game. So again, on those who would restrict our freedom, definitely double standards apply.
And you know, it's getting another ridiculous example. 3 weeks ago, there's a very popular British show called The Great...
Well, this is freedom of speech. That's what we're leading into.
Yeah, the Great... What's it called? The Great Bake Off?
The Great British Bake Off.
The Great British Bake Off, where they make
cakes.
Really nice cakes with lots of cream and sugar and jam. It's a cake-making competition.
Okay. What's wrong? That's
right. So, one of the household names, one of the presenters, saw this big cake, lots of sugar and whatever, and he said, that looks like diabetes on a plate. That set off the biggest storm. It's been all over the front pages of the media.
Why?
Because
you're not supposed to joke about diabetes.
People with diabetes or type 1 diabetes were saying this is a disgraceful thing to say.
Why?
Why?
What was their justification, I mean?
Well, if you're going to get really sort of cone-headed about it, that's probably saying that
cone-headed, yes.
That probably is going to offend somebody, okay? But there's obviously type 2 diabetes.
Where's my cone when I need it?
Type 2 diabetes you can develop by eating too much sugar in your diet, and it's become a big problem, grown hugely in America and Britain and so on. And type 1 diabetes, I understand, is something which is more genetic and you're born with or get at an early age, and has nothing to do with your diet. So the people with type 1 diabetes were saying this is an absolutely disgraceful thing to say.
Because there's nothing I can do about it.
Yes,
that the idea?
I think so. Yeah.
So it's just
but I think if people want to,
you can't joke about death and being ill. What can
but if people want to take offence, that's one thing. We face something even more sinister nowadays, which is people taking vicarious offence. So they take offence on behalf of another group. And we see it, for a silly example, but was at Sheffield University, Students' Union banned for the students wanted to celebrate on Halloween the Mexican Day of the Dead, and some students wanted to wear sombreros. And the Students' Union put a notice out saying, no, you couldn't do this because of cultural appropriation. Some people would be offended. And of course, the Mexican students at Sheffield University said, this is nonsense. We're very happy. Everybody should wear sombreros. But the Students' Union, this sort of Stalinist approach to life, or
this cultural appropriation, this idea that people go around. I remember in college, it was always the nerds who were trying to get attention by trying to stop people going about their business. Because they had no personality, basically.
Exactly right.
And they had not only no personality, no girlfriend, no boyfriend. You go on down the list. They were miserable, and they wanted everyone else to be miserable. The last thing they wanted to see was a smile on your face, telling jokes.
But you see, people will say, well, yes, or if women of a white skin sort of braid their hair in a way which is traditionally African, somehow you're stealing the African's identity. I mean, is the response to that to say to the African woman or woman of African origin, well, could you please remove your shoes because you're stealing my identity? Obviously not. That would be completely crazy.
Where does it stop? Is it cultural appropriation if you eat Indian food? Or Mexican food?
Yeah, exactly.
Or Chinese? But that's the direction this is going.
If you're a Western and you become a Buddhist.
Exactly.
If you're a Buddhist, you become a Christian. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think there is really, I hate to say it, but it seems there is an intelligent quotient problem here.
I think you're right.
With people. It just seems they're not very bright. Because in the old days,
Makes
That's
you
why
wonder-
you had manners. I mean, it's
Exactly.
PC has evolved and taken the space where manners used to be.
Exactly.
I don't know.
And,
I don't know if there's studies, but have you seen the movie Idiocracy?
Idiocracy, yeah.
Yes,
the Mike
Idiocracy,
Judge thing.
yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Idiocracy.
Beautiful movie.
Ruled by
I,
idiots.
I was having a
But
conversation.
it
with-
feels it's going that way.
It does.
sometimes.
Yeah, no, I was having a conversation about this very subject with a friend, intelligent fellow, the other night, and he was mentioning about we were talking about PC and trying to find the dividing line between manners and when PC took over. He's a lot more left wing than I am, or possibly I'm sure than you are, and but he's a great guy, and it doesn't it doesn't matter. But the thing was, I was saying, even 25 years ago, I had this idea about the future being like more cartoonized, our life becoming more like cartoons. I had no idea that it was really, the cartoons were going to predict the future. As you say, Idiocracy, which is a cartoon-like film. It's not a cartoon, but cartoon-like. And Mike Judge is a cartoonist, of course. And didn't he, Beavis and Butthead? Is that not him? Yeah. And other,
was it South
which
Park?
is amazing.
Who did South
and
Park?
South Park, yeah. I don't know. I don't think he did South Park. Did he?
No, but that was
I think
a
it's
couple
two
of very,
guys who did that.
A couple of very bright guys.
Yeah, a couple, at least a couple very bright guys. And then what was the other one that predicted Trump actually becoming president? There was one. Was that The Simpsons? Or
I didn't
something?
see that one.
Maybe it was South Park.
Yeah.
But there was this prediction through cartoons of the future.
Yeah.
And through cartoonists. So it's almost it is surreal.
But we are
in its
living
real
through
sense.
a
Yeah.
progressive shutdown of
Yeah.
freedom of speech.
Yes, we are.
And some people might say, what's the problem? Because these reductions of freedom of speech are all about respecting the rights of minority interest groups. And you can say, okay, well, that's fine, but then it gets smaller and smaller, and then it gets to a point where we can't find the truth anymore.
I agree with
the
you.
heart
Yeah.
of the matter
Let me stick
was
it,
the absolute heart of the matter, and was the Jordan Peterson interview with Cathy Newman.
Oh, yeah.
Nearly 2 years ago.
That was a famous interview.
Yes, which
And
Cathy Newman and Jordan
Cathy
Peterson.
Newman.
She's a British interviewer. He was on
she's a Channel 4
Channel 4.
Cambridge graduate.
So people can look it up if they want.
Yeah,
to.
a
If they
On
huge
YouTube.
thing on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he'd just published his book 12 Rules.
Right.
And he'd become very famous because he spoke up against a law in Canada to restrict speech, or actually not restrict speech. It was going to enforce.
It was about
speech.
pronouns,
It was
mostly.
about gender pronouns.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jordan Peterson was a huge sort of sensation and was going
I
around
think
talking
most
about
people who look at the internet have heard of him.
Yeah.
Pro or con, but you've heard of him. Yeah.
But it gets to this heart
Yeah.
in the interview when they're talking about transgender rights. And Cathy Newman goes, why does your right to freedom of speech trump a transgender person's right not to be offended? She went off script with that line. And it was an absolute own goal, which Jordan Peterson popped in the net, where he essentially said, well, if you can't risk offending somebody, then you can't think and you can't find the truth.
And he just said,
And
he
he
said
said,
to her,
"Look
you're
at-
just offending me.
Look at
Right?
this interview right now.
Right, yeah.
Look how it's been going in the last 20 minutes.
exactly.
You're pushing me around
Yeah.
and
It's not
that's your
comfortable.
job as a journalist to try
Yeah.
and find out the truth.
Yeah.
And more power to you. But it's
Yeah.
been very uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
And she had no answer.
She had no answer. Yeah.
No answer.
I don't know what the answer is for that.
The profession of journalism and responsible politicians relies on seeking the
Of course
truth.
it does.
She just came off as rather airheaded. in that.
indeed.
She came off as somebody who you wouldn't want to talk to at a cocktail party for sure.
Well, exactly, which is no, but she and she, of course, she then was
Unless it was
silent.
after a
but
couple of
she,
drinks
but then
and you
she,
wanted to zing her.
but then of course she admitted that she
Yeah.
couldn't answer his point, which is you're a journalist, you're doing your job,
Mm-hmm.
but you are now assuming that your right to offend me is more important than my right to appear on your program and be questioned in a civilized fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And she had no answer to that because there was no answer to that question. She'd been pushing him for all this, which is part of her job all this time, but not probing questions, but just sort of generally misquoting what he'd said and asking him to defend something he hadn't. And you know, we see it again with, and it happens with Roger Scruton, who was accused. He was on this non-paid job on this government advisory body about building beautiful buildings, and something a journalist from New Statesman.
Yes.
New Statesman set out deliberately to misquote him. And this went all around the end, and then stupidly...
And he was fired automatically.
He was fired automatically by some stupid...
By Theresa May.
...government minister.
Scruton was fired.
Yes.
On a non-paid job.
And then, of course, when they looked
for making a comment where he was alleged to have... It was concocted, but what he'd said was anti-Semitic, because they were talking about...
that's one they like.
They were talking about Soros and Hungary.
Well, you're not... this is the thing. You're not allowed to criticize someone who's Jewish, someone... you can criticize someone who's Catholic,
but not someone who's Jewish. He didn't criticize them, you see. His comment was taken out of context.
But what I'm saying
then
is...
The Guardian got hold of the whole transcript, and he was exonerated, but of course the damage was already done.
He was
My point is different.
He was eventually...
You should be allowed to criticize...
He was eventually reinstated, but the point was... He wasn't reinstated, but the point was a Conservative government in the United Kingdom, which should know better. The government minister removed him from his job on the strength of something on social media without actually looking into the facts,
I get the
which is crazy.
It's a very
It's the same with that
point.
professor, what's his name, the Nobel Prize winner, London University, who made that joke at a conference in Korea or somewhere, where he said the trouble with women in the laboratories, either they cry or they want to marry you. And of course the joke, and if you listen to when he actually made that speech, every woman in the room burst out laughing.
Yeah.
And the joke was doubly funny because his wife is somebody he'd met who had been his laboratory assistant. But of course some American journalist in America took offence and he lost his job and nobody would stick up for him. And that's crazy.
And nowadays, of course, these big corporates say there's no hokey-cokey between even consensual employees. So a couple of days ago...
That's ridiculous.
The chief executive of McDonald's, on £12 million a year, got fired for having a completely consensual relationship with an unnamed female employee.
Yeah. I think that's really gone too far.
Right.
Because then Big Brother's telling you, oh, you can't... You've got to resign your job in order to, But where do people meet? They meet through friends. They meet at work.
Exactly.
And Roger Liddell makes this exact point in his article this week in The Spectator.
Yeah. Exactly. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So now it's better to meet people anonymously through Tinder or something appalling like that, the most appalling sort of stuff. Than it is to actually meet them through work and have a common interest.
So what we're saying is you shouldn't meet people with whom you know at work, with whom you've actually met in a normal circumstance, who you might know. Yeah. You should actually throw yourself at the mercy of a computer program where you're likely to meet sort of serial killers, psychopaths and allied trades. I mean, this is complete nonsense. We're destroying...
Nothing necessarily in common at all because the person could be lying.
Exactly. So we're destroying...
The whole purpose of meeting people... I've tried to explain this to people about Tinder. I say the whole purpose of the way things used to be is that people were vetted. You knew who they were, so they couldn't be a psychopath.
Because they either worked with you, or they were friends of your friends, or you'd met them in a normal social context.
Or in Tennessee, a cousin.
Yeah.
Or even a sister. No, just kidding.
No, that's Alabama.
That was Alabama. No, we can't. I had to make a Southern joke.
You did.
But the trouble with this whole movement is...
I'm from the South, folks.
In Britain... Freedom of speech is one thing and very sad because no one now wants to seek the truth. As another aside, I'm sure you saw the fantastic mini-series on Chernobyl, the drama.
I haven't seen it, but I've been to Chernobyl. I know a little bit about it.
Sure. Well,
I wrote about it.
One of the best things ever made on the history of the Chernobyl disaster in April.
I know you recommended it to me before. I have to watch it.
And it's got this leitmotif running through every scene of, that Soviet poisonous situation of no one able to speak the truth.
No one able to speak the truth.
And it comes back, but it comes back right at the end. Yeah. Where there's a sort of big reveal. There's a big reveal. Yeah. The final episode, they have a trial. Yeah. And the chief scientist responsible for the cleanup, who was a chap called Luganov, I believe, played by the absolutely fantastic Jared Harris. Fantastic actor. He finally has the balls to stand up and speak the truth, which no one had been able to really say.
You mean gonads? I knew that you meant to say
gonads. He explains, I won't spoil it, but he explains why this explosion has happened. And of course, they say, well, why would we not do the design in the safe way like in the West? And he says, well, because it's too expensive and it's cheaper in the way we do it in Russia, even though it's dangerous and has resulted. And he said, and the problem was, and this is the big speech, he goes, you know, if we don't speak the truth, if we say a lie.
As with their submarines. Yeah.
If we ignore the truth and just keep this facade of lies going, we build up a debt. And sooner or later, that debt has to be repaid. And that you know, in that case, of course, it was the horrible disaster resulting in the loss of tens of thousands of lives, even though the official Soviet body count is only 11 or something pitiful. An environmental disaster, and it could have been a lot worse for years, and a no-go zone for decades to come. But in the encroachments on freedom of speech in Britain right now, and Canada, and America, and France, and Germany, and Spain, we are building up a debt. We're building up a debt, and I don't think anyone knows really where this is going. Another example, and this would be funny if it wasn't true. This happened literally 3 or 4 weeks ago. The police in Oxford, in England, were running around with a big appeal and posters saying there's been some ghastly hate crime committed. People have been putting offensive stickers around the town for the last 6 months, and we've got to track them down because this is against the law, and so on. And so the people of Oxford were quite bemused by this and quite concerned. And when the police were asked, well, can you give what was in these stickers? They said, no, we can't tell you. It's so offensive and so ghastly that we can't let you know. But, you know, if you know anybody who's been doing it, tell us. It's ridiculous, OK? So, of course, the journalist did a bit of digging to find out what was going on here, and they managed to uncover 2 of the offending stickers. One said the following: woman, noun, female of the human species. Second sticker said...
what is a woman?
Second sticker said...
Good question.
Second sticker said, women do not have penises. And so, what is going on?
What is going on?
That is a hate crime, apparently, now, according to the Thames Valley Police.
If your house is burgled...
Apparently.
If your house is burgled, the Thames Valley Police will probably tell you they really don't have the
resources
to come and investigate it, unless it's a really serious burglary and somebody's been shot. And this is the sadness we're facing. It's complete. And I don't blame the police. They are subject to who knows what regulation by
yes
whoever.
No.
I was reading a story where
now.
they were talking about making petty crime under crime under $1,500 somewhere in the States. I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was California, but I won't throw another log on the fire of California at the moment. But they were saying, if you do that, then it's just open season, isn't it?
Yes.
Because everything's under $1,500 pretty much. You know?
But these are still in the
Except a car.
These examples, as awful as they are still in the realms of words. You know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. However, it's now gone further.
What happened
so
to
let me tell you another one example.
Go ahead.
So on the transgender thing. Yeah. So a chap, a rapist, was under suspicion of rape. I don't think it had reached trial yet, but he was in prison, awaiting trial as a racist, potential alleged rapist. And while he was in prison, and the investigation was going on, he decided that he wanted to be a woman, and identified as a woman, and made a demand that he be transferred from the men's section of the prison to the women's section of the prison.
Yes.
And they complied, bizarrely. They complied. And guess what happened next?
What happened next?
He raped women in the women's section of the prison.
But of course.
And this became a big scandal, as it should have been, that this whole self-identification thing has clearly gone too far in this case. But the BBC, when they reported it, and this, again, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious, they referred to this guy who'd moved over and was starting raping women in the women's section of the prison. They referred to her penis, talking about this guy. Because he was...
Okay, all right. It's just ridiculous.
And so what we have now is, you know, the flocky-knocky nihilification of language.
I know transvestites who wouldn't agree with that, but never mind.
What exactly?
Not that I know a lot of them, but I used to know one who was performing.
It's completely diminishing language and meaning and common sense.
Yeah,
how far does it go?
It's absurd. Well, I mean, common sense, you know, that much maligned thing these days, and manners would go a long way, because manners used to take place of this kind of shouting and immediate misunderstandings that go on. The manners were there to show a bit of respect and to give yourself a pause and a little distance, so you didn't get in people's face all the time. It's very important. I mean, and when you bureaucratize manners, which is seems to be what's happened, then you have neither manners nor distance,
Not anything at all.
nor any basis for relationships. I mean, everybody seems to be wanting to remove any kind of possible human mistake in interactions.
No, it's about people taking offence and saying, "Look at me, poor me,"
Exactly.
and
Victimization.
and
Self-victimization,
But it's become
yeah.
so exaggerated now that it's, I don't like you, so I'm going to scrutinise everything you've said, which we can find in the electronic media of the last 20 plus years. I'm going to find one comment which I think I'm going to be able to pull you down by.
And this is
And
happening
I'm going to
about-
go for it. And this is exactly what's happening.
Social media has a lot to.
Social media is
and
really
so
the
forth.
heart
I mean,
of this.
but in a practical sense, in the current election,
Well,
the United-
it's certainly
but in the
augmented
current
it,
election in the
increased
United
it.
Kingdom, a lot of female MPs are standing down specifically because they can no longer take, understandably, the offensive emails and the offensive tweets they receive on social media. Some of which, if you speak, you listen to what they have to say, are really awful. We're going to kill your children or whatever. And the police try and intervene when they can, but it's much more exciting for the police, obviously, to worry about the use of the wrong pronoun than it is actually to. So I'm being a bit unfair, I suspect.
Well,
but the point is, people feel on social media they can be offensive about everybody and everything, and
Yeah.
so and this is an example of how they are
the
affecting
nerds are
everybody's freedom,
anonymous.
because they are
That's the
driving away potentially good candidates from our parliament, because these people say, why should I subject myself to this unwarranted and rather unpleasant abuse? And they don't know whether the tweet is coming from some nutcase sitting alone in his bedroom who'll never do anything, or somebody who might actually be waiting outside the school to kidnap their children or whatever. They don't
Well, the
know
former
that.
is usually the case.
The former is usually
But,
the case.
99.9.
There was one MP, Joe Cox, who was murdered by one nutcase, and so I suppose other women MPs are very worried they might also be murdered by nutcases. You don't know.
Well, there was a farcical situation in Parliament. So after the Supreme Court of Britain overturned the prorogation of Parliament, and they all came back, and so the House was packed.
What is prorogation, by the way?
A
Prorogation is
suspension
when you
of Parliament
it's when you end
pre-election.
a session of Parliament.
Okay, just so people know.
But people talk about suspensions. In fact, suspension of Parliament would imply, sorry to sound very boring, that Parliament had been no longer functioning at all. And I don't think anybody's ever tried to suspend Parliament until we had last had a Stuart
been
king in about 300 years ago. So prorogation is the technical term where you end one session of Parliament and begin another.
Okay.
But I think as do many lawyers, I think the Supreme Court made a mistake. In fact, the prorogation was obviously legal, and they've invented something completely new, which is itself rather sinister. But that's maybe for a different programme. But I mean, this concept that somehow, very briefly, they invented this constitutional concept that Parliament exists to keep the executive in check. Therefore, anything which is done by the executive which restricts Parliament's ability to keep the executive in check must therefore be unlawful.
But Parliament is created to keep the king in check,
but this is exactly,
or the Queen in check.
But this is a completely new concept, because the
not
government,
the Prime Minister who serves at the pleasure of Parliament.
Exactly. So the whole thing was.
So that's not right at all. Obviously,
the Supreme Court made a mistake, and they had to invent something which had never been put forward as a principle before. And this is about freedom. It's about strange. So some people
it's
who
about
judge,
twisting things.
It is about and it's about a breakdown between who is responsible for what. It's about judges now interfering in political decisions. Something which in the United Kingdom, that's why we had 1688, we had revolutions and things to actually establish who does what, and this has now.
Well,
because the simple point is, once judges start interfering with politicians will then be tempted to interfere with judges, and that is a very slippery slope if you're talking about freedom.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you're supposed to have you have the split between the judiciary and the legislative and then the executive, which is the way the United States once was celebrated. ones
I mean,
that
that
we'll
actually is very much a
celebrate for
French concept. I mean, the United Kingdom,
Yeah.
or the constituent countries, which is essentially England before that, we didn't have the concept of the separation of powers.
Yeah.
We had the concept of the rule of law, which was rather different and rather more advanced than the separation of powers, which is a sort of simpler version of getting to the same result. Because we were very fortunate by accident or by design to have people who ran our country and they who actually knew what their duties were and they would be, make sure that they did it.
Listen,
But Nick raised a very good point on this, though.
Why don't you pick it up then?
Well, it's about one of the points is Britain has had for centuries a reputation of great legal system,
Yeah.
to such a degree that counterparties from all over the world that have no business in Britain, they aren't British, they will organise their legal agreements under English and Welsh law. And my fear is, as a result of this Supreme Court
You're
decision...
talking about the common law, basically.
Yeah.
Yes, and the fear is, as a result of that Supreme Court decision and the general mess over Brexit with people who don't like Brexit and won't accept the democratic mandate, constantly running off to the courts to seek help from judges who have hitherto been considered absolutely impartial. That now has been questioned. To such a degree, I had a very chastening story from a very good friend who he's a global senior partner of a major law firm and jet sets all over the world, and he was having lunch in Moscow last week with a Russian client, and his client, this Russian chap, was saying, politics is such a mess in Britain these days, and what a legal mess.
A Russian.
from a Russian in Moscow.
Well, obviously a Russian with a great sense of humour. That's
He wasn't really comparing it. I mean, he's doing business all over. So
yeah.
Sure.
He's
But
not comparing it to
you've got to
Russia
be very careful. I
necessarily.
mean, the British Constitution works very well because it has always been run by people who understood that I think Vernon Bogdan or somebody described it as sort of the good chap theory of a constitution. It worked because everybody, whether they were in Parliament or they were judges or wherever they were, they understood that they had to behave in a certain way. And the courts were very careful to stay well out of the political arena. And if you concede the point that the Prime Minister, one of the prerogative powers of the Crown, which is now exercised historically by the government, has the power to ask the monarch for prorogation, then that's it. How he asks the monarch, and it's up to you don't interfere any further. If we decide this is my cup of coffee, okay, we can have a legal debate about whose cup of coffee this is, but if we decide that this is my cup of coffee, how I drink it, whether it's hot or cold or put sugar in it or milk, is irrelevant. It's my coffee, I'll drink it as I please.
And you're suggesting this is a universal principle.
It was a universal principle of English law when dealing in constitutional matters.
It should be a universal principle,
exactly.
shouldn't it?
So we can debate. The court can properly
free
decide what is the prerogative power. In this case, the power to prorogue Parliament is a prerogative power of the Crown. So once we've acknowledged, the court can say that is a prerogative power, but the court cannot then say under what conditions that is exercised and whether Boris Johnson's intention on a particular day, he was thinking about something else, therefore, by virtue of that. Even the Church, when actually talking about sacraments, doesn't take into account the thought process of the priest. If it is done according to the rules, it's a valid sacrament. The priest cannot believe in it at all. It doesn't affect the validity of the sacrament. So it's the same idea, I think, and this is what people... But we live, because of this lack of freedom or respect for freedom, nobody wants to actually go into the real rules and think about that. It's just, we don't like what Boris Johnson was doing.
Let's come back to it, because we're running to time. And that was an extensive... I think that was an extensive explanation not only of prorogation, but also of the separation of powers and the way it should work. And that's applicable in Poland, that's applicable throughout Europe.
Of course it is.
And, of course, the United States. It's no accident that the first amendment to the United States Constitution, which is still considered, I suppose, the document about freedom, and should be adhered to as such, is freedom of speech.
Of course.
It's number one because that is number one. Because without it, you can't really do anything else.
Indeed, one thing, many years ago on the television, there was a BBC documentary. It was about Václav Havel when he was still in those days a playwright in Czech. And he was making a point about the importance of humour. and was talking about the time when... No, but the important about the time about when in Czech you couldn't sort of openly make fun of anything, but there were these underground comedy clubs. And he described jokes as minor revolutions, because in every joke there's an element of truth. And if we say that people
If it's
can't...
a good joke.
Yes, but if we say that people can't make jokes if they have to, they can't be free to say what they think, then we're actually restricting freedom. And that's part of the point. We live in an age now where people are very troubled by other people making jokes. Because if it doesn't fit their worldview, they can't say, oh, this is humour, and let's ignore it. You're free to make a joke. I don't have to like your joke. You don't have to find it funny.
People are too thin-skinned.
Very thin-skinned.
You have to, the first thing is you need to be somewhat aware of the absurdity of your own existence. And then when you are that, if you're not too narcissistically solipsistic, then you can...
That's a marvellous alliteration.
then you can see that you're not alone in the world and you must relate to other people.
But humour is very important. I mean,
which is what freedom of speech is all about.
It is about. I mean, obviously you shouldn't go out to deliberately be unkind to people.
Yep.
But you know, if you look at some of the political cartoons of Gilray, for example, in the 18th century England, they were vicious compared to anything that was you'd see today. But that was considered the price you paid for freedom, because it's more important that people can say what they think and express themselves than it is to sort of try and create some sort of universal sort of good rules for behaviour. It doesn't work like that.
Well, this has to do with, and also with, to some extent, with allowing demonstrations, with, you know, listening, allowing speech that you don't agree with. You may, you know, somebody comes out and denies the Holocaust. Well, it's absurd, but, you know, they have the right to say it and be called absurd.
Exactly.
Or people that's the point.
Yeah,
or people who think that
society should
air that dirty linen, so you know where it's coming from.
Or people who insist
laugh
that, or
at
people who
it.
insist that the Earth is flat, for example, they should be allowed to say it. I mean, we laugh at them because it's obviously patently nonsense. But I wouldn't stop them saying it. That's
Gosh, a lot of people do think the Earth is flat these days.
And people
They're the
insist
same
that
people who
Oxford is
believe
better
in
than Cambridge.
aliens.
Yeah, people do it. Yes. But
What's that? What?
People who insist that Oxford is better than Cambridge, they just get laughed at.
It's absurd.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, everyone knows it's the University of St Andrews.
They do, yes. But
That's the Blackadder line.
Yes.
When he's trying to catch the spy. I finally found out when Blackadder's reporting to General Meltrit. I finally worked out who the spy was when I asked him to name which one of these 3 universities wasn't one of the great ones. Humber, Oxford, and Cambridge. And General Meltrit goes, yes, quite right. Oxford's a dump.
yes.
So you got him, yeah? Anyway, it's Independence Day in 2 days, and I just want to draw attention to your poppy. The tradition in Britain is to wear the poppy, and for what reason?
Because you buy the poppy, and it's money which is raised by the British Legion, which is a charity which looks principally after retired or disabled or servicemen and women. And poppy, of course, was actually based on Earl Haig, who was being the commander of the British force in the First World War, set up the Royal British Legion and the fund. And they chose the poppy because these are the flowers which are grown in the fields of Flanders.
And so many...
Yes, and exactly.
Hundreds of
and
thousands
so they're sold every
there.
year, and volunteers go up and down the streets of
Maybe
England.
millions died there. A lot. Hundreds of
a lot.
thousands.
And this is a symbol of
both
raising money. I mean, there have been various attempts over the years to sort of politicise this by people suggest we should wear white poppies.
Right.
Or more recently, I saw somebody suggest that we should wear yellow and blue poppies because the European Union was responsible for our freedom and our freedom from wars.
So I think,
but no. So this is actually why I'm wearing it.
But it's Armistice Day, and that's the point.
Armistice,
and I think
the 11th hour of the 11th month of the 11th day. Yes.
The 11th day of the 11th month in 1918 was the you still commemorate it. You see, it's such an important date with a poppy in your lapel.
Yes.
And the Queen will do a ceremony. In the United States, it's Veterans Day, which is exactly the same remembrance. It's a very important, hugely important day to remember the people who go and fight and have fought for freedom of speech against totalitarianism. And this is something which always has to be, as Guy rightly said,
of course,
always has to be remembered and consistently fought for. So we should do some serious thinking on the 11th and every other day too. But on the 11th we can just shout it out, how lucky we are and how lucky Poland is to be in its position and to have got its visas, another sign of final freedom for our great ally in the United States, the country of Poland, for 200 years, helped us fight for freedom. And finally, they're getting their end. And who would have thought, you know, Mr. Trump, you would have thought the more liberal government under Mr. Obama would have done it, but no, they couldn't see fit. Yeah,
No, well, exactly.
So let's give Mr. Trump 1 on his report card. Give him a 10 on this one. Yeah, and are you doing anything special for Independence Day? Anything special?
No.
No, me
No
either.
plans,
We're just here
yes.
in the studio.
Yes.
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah.
We're here in a deserted city.
We're here in a deserted city. I was in Gdansk, as I said,
Yeah.
and I just came back. Oh, I wanted to say this. Beautiful city.
It is.
They have done such remarkable
Yeah.
things even in the last year in Gdansk since I was there. It is simply breathtaking the way the place looks now. And you walk in the old town of Gdansk, and it really looks like, in some areas, a better Amsterdam. Because Amsterdam is not even in some ways as grand as good old Danzig, Gdansk to us appears these days. So it's really a fun place. Yeah, I hope to go back many more times and go to some of the museums. Solidarity Museum, another thing.
Did you visit the new Museum of the Second World War?
Oh, yeah.
We didn't go to museums because this is something good to do. I think during the winter you're going to be inside doing it, and we had just good enough weather to still to walk about and enough light. We got some sun, and it was really very impressive and relaxing day in Gdansk yesterday. Of course, we were on the road going through the Teutonic castles on the way up the day before, so we stopped in Nijice and Ostroda and
Malbork.
we didn't go to Malbork because again, that's a whole.
The whole day.
You need a day or two there
Yeah.
to really do it right.
That's a big place.
It's the biggest. Is it the biggest castle in the world?
The biggest Teutonic castle.
It's the biggest Teutonic one. It's one of the biggest castles. I
It is a
think.
large one, yes.
In not that it's just big, but it's the beauty of it, of its construction and the rest. But that's something. Maybe you'll come along, Nick, or
Yeah.
Guy, when we go. Poland Daily
With
Travel,
pleasure.
and we'll see it. Yeah. At any rate, I want to thank you for being here. Freedom of speech,
Very important.
which is what we're practicing here as well.
Actually, we
And-
probably are free here. We probably say things here that we wouldn't be able to say on the BBC, for example.
We might get in trouble, yeah.
But the point is, nobody
Hey,
should
and
get
remember
but
that.
nobody should get in
Yeah.
trouble for what they say.
We shouldn't, but and some
Even
of the things we
even
said,
Voltaire.
we could get in trouble on CBS or NBC.
But wasn't it Voltaire who said something like, you know, I may disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it.
I think that's
And
that
that's
is
what
true,
we
but
should- we
they-
should
They would
remember
have
that.
their hair on fire today, wouldn't they?
They would. They'd be shocked, actually.
They'd be shocked.
That when for most people this daily struggle for life has become so less of a struggle that we now sort of make these intellectual
We create problems
barriers
where
for
there aren't
ourselves.
any.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point Nick's touched on. If we have time, I'd just, coming full circle,
Yeah,
I'd like
please
to
do.
mention,
Yeah.
is that, in a sense, the success of long peace now has created this great big vacuum to be filled. You know, so
Which is good.
80 years ago, everyone worrying about
Yeah.
survival of their nation and their own lives.
Yeah.
If you're having to go off to
Well,
war.
the medicine's
And
better, diets are better, people
Yeah.
are more
Well, it's
vigilant,
funny, isn't it?
governments are more
But
stable.
It's
generally,
funny, isn't it? You know,
everything.
we in America, and I think in the UK as
So
well now,
much to
regrettably,
celebrate.
we have all these students who need safe places because they're frightened by Daily Mail headlines. You know, their predecessors in 1944, when they were on a landing craft heading towards one of the Normandy
Yes,
beaches,
exactly.
there was no safe place there because
Yes.
there's the water,
What
there's
about
the
the
beach,
people in
those are the machine guns
concentration
waiting for.
camps?
What about
Who survived and went on to
or the
lead
Warsaw
productive
Uprising survivors who I had the privilege to talk to earlier this year for Poland Daily History. You know, there was no safe place as a 15-year-old boy in Żoliborz for Julian Kulski fighting the German soldiers,
Yeah.
defending his home. I mean, this is crazy.
We should be
and in
happy.
those scenes-
We've got to wind up. Last word.
Well, in those scenes, you know, soldiers at war, and a guy's there lying, stepped on a landmine, and it's like, I've lost my leg. And his mate goes, no, you haven't, it's just over there.
In other words, perspective.
Perspective.
Be happy with the freedom we do
Or the Earl
enjoy.
of Uxbridge at the Battle of Waterloo when with Wellington. You know, you've lost your leg, sir. My God, I have.
And not be happy with the freedom we've got.
Exactly.
And not let
Others take
be
it away.
vigilant and not let the people who want to mold our minds get away with it.
Because they expect
Yeah.
to be free to actually carry on their mind-moulding activities, of course. It's a bit of a one-way street with these characters.
There you are, and you had the last word. Thank you very much for watching There's a Will. We're glad that you tuned in. We're on the internet, on the YouTube, and leave us a comment if you like us if you like what we said. And if you don't like what we said, put a comment, but make a point. If you make a comment that says, just derogatory, or you can say something laudatory.
Say what you like.
Say it was good. But if it's just derogatory, it's no good. Say, make a specific point, okay? Because it's much better. Thank you very much for watching. Guys, thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Always a pleasure.
And hit it. We're out of here.